Well, yeah, I mean, Web3.
So actually, there's a history here. Do you know the first time this term was used?
Yeah, it was used after Web 2.
So
I told you my internet story, my HTML.
Yeah, this is Web 1.
Yeah, Web 1. I remember Web 2, and I remember it happening. I remember when people were talking about it, and they were talking about it with regards to interactive web pages. You type in Google, you get predictive results. You'd have Ajax. It was called Ajax, wasn't it? Like the interactive things on the pages. It was the web, like Web 1 was you go to a website, it said about us,
static
products,
content.
So, and each page was literally .html. Yeah. Maybe some CSS. There's certainly like lots of...
This is the GeoCities days.
Yeah, GeoCities. Yeah, GeoCities. But there was no connection to a database. Like a lot of these web pages were literally the text was coded into the page. Yeah. And then you got interactive pages and you had user-generated content, the early social media.
So this was like forums or boards, right?
Friendster.
Friendster.
Lycos.
No, but the really early ones, the first applications were, do you remember guest books, things like this? It was like a CGI script, right? So it was just a simple program. Actually, it's funny, I'm a software developer. The very first software I ever wrote was like Perl script, CGI scripts in like the mid 90s, early to mid 90s. But it was something like this, like a guest book. You arrive on a web page, it's like, oh, you could type anything you want there. And again, no Sybil resistance, no spam prevention, people, but it was like almost like there wasn't even spam back then because spam itself hadn't been invented at that stage, right?
You had email
good
spam.
Behavior.
Email spam was ridiculous.
Email spam really, if I remember correctly, I feel like it started late 90s. It really started to, because the point is you didn't have a critical mass of people using email prior to that. So there wasn't the point in sending spam.
All I remember is when spam really took off, it was relentless. And there was a lot of porn spam, just like literal hardcore shit.
It was use this to make your dick bigger. That's what I remember.
I mean, I know it was pretty targeted. I never received that, but but yeah. So when the Web 2 stuff started happening, it was, I don't know who coined it. I don't know where it came from, but it felt like this is an improvement in the way you can code web pages. And the benefit is to those who build web pages and companies who build web pages and people who use the internet. It felt like a collective benefit.
And there was a clear line between Web 1 and Web 2, right? Web 1 was, as we said, static. It was publishers pushing things to users. It was not interactive, right? And Web 2 was the opposite of all those things. It was interactive. It was user-generated content. It was social, right? It was also, another aspect of it was purchasing things online with credit cards. That was a Web 2 thing. That didn't exist in Web 1.
But it wasn't, there weren't VCs talking about Web 2 companies. It just didn't exist for me.
I feel like it's one of those things, it's like a term that we apply in retrospect, maybe.
It was applied in retrospect.
I think you're right.
But, these things are happening. It's like, oh, it's like Web 2.
Well, it's like World War I was called the Great War until World War II came along. Right?
But I remember people talking about Web 3. And when they were talking about Web 3, they were talking about the semantic web.
Exactly. This is Tim Berners-Lee.
Right. The semantic web.
Who, by the way, gets to do this because the man invented the web.
Thank you, Tim Berners-Lee. Thank you for not creating patents around it,
or putting a shitcoin on it or something.
But I think I could be wrong. But it was the semantic web. This is what's coming. Yeah, the semantic web is coming. It will be a little bit more decentralized. And I remember it coming, and I think it was the World Wide Web Consortium,
W3C,
who were talking about Web 3.
And this was, just to put things in perspective, this was early 2000s.
Yeah.
Early aughts.
I was still involved in coding web pages back then. So it was talked about, this thing is coming. And, I'm not sure how much the semantic web actually took off, the tagging of every piece of content, whatever. I know people talked about it. I know there was I
think some of it got incorporated into like HTML5.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Was it like Schema 2 or something? I can't remember. But anyway, I remember it being talked about.
Yeah.
And it would be a more private web, a more decentralized web, et cetera, et cetera. Cool. And then I feel like over the last year, 18 months, Web3 has now been changed into token holders owning part of companies. It's a new way of creating companies which aren't centrally created. They're decentralized companies, which we know they actually fucking won't be. But everyone else gets to own a bit of it, right? Cool. If you're right, then at the point where you get to put your VC money in, at your whatever level that you're buying all your tokens, multi-coin, A16Z,
Web 16Z.
Web 16Z. Why don't you open it up at that point? Everyone else can get in. Why are you buying at that point, calling it Web3, having a beta product build, launching it, allowing everyone else to buy, and you being provided with exit liquidity?
Yeah. So everything that you just described is perfectly okay with me except the last part. I think that VC as an ecosystem, the way these investments are structured evolved a certain way over time for a reason, right? Like the one thing that I've taken from crypto the past few years and sort of protocol mechanism design is that incentives matter enormously, right? And when you give the early investors that early exit opportunity, it throws everything off. The incentives are completely wrong. Because just to be clear, right, not every listener might be familiar with the way a VC fund typically works in kind of a Web2 world or typical kind of equity world, right? You're locked in. You're holding that investment for 5, 7, 9 years, whatever it takes, until you have a quote unquote liquidity event or an exit, right? Something like an acquisition or a IPO. I always make a mistake and say ICO. Yeah.
Oh, you provide it. You might be involved in the seed round,
right,
or the A round,
follow-on round, right?
And you find a potential company and you invest 1 to 5 million. The founders go out and they build a product. They essentially work on product market fit. They test their product. They make sure that there's an audience. They check whether there's a genuine growth rate that can be achieved.
Right.
They try and understand what the marketing channel is. Once they've understood what the marketing channel is, what is the investment need into it? What is the retention of people of using that product?
And by the way, you can't be acquired or IPO unless you figure these things out, right? Because you have to disclose them.
Yeah. And is the revenue working? Can you, so essentially it goes back to that acquisition, conversion, retention, monetization, that whole, and yes, okay, we've proven product market fit. We now need to scale B round. Okay, we now need to scale again, C round. Eventually you get to an IPO.
Ideally.
I
mean, IPOs have become more scarce and it's gotten harder because of a lot more regulation.
And also
acquisitions are much more common. Now we have the SPACs.
And they're also a bit bullshit. They seem to be IPOing at values where it's just another event for people to exit liquidity event. I mean, fucking Coinbase, perfect example.
Coinbase was down almost 80-something% on the year recently.
It's like a shitcoin. So that we all understand that's the traditional route. But now with Web3, they get to, as I've said this a million times, you get to IPO at your seed round.
Yeah.
You get instant exit liquidity and you have not proved product market fit. How many shitcoins have actually proven a sustainable long-term product market fit? I think Bitcoin has. Bitcoin's obviously not a shitcoin. I think in some ways Monero has created product market fit for a certain audience. Mm-hmm. I've always been okay with Monero. There's an audience out there who are buying things with Monero because it's private and they trust it.
Yeah.
They've done a better job than any other privacy coin. As much as I'm not a fan of it, Ethereum has proved product market fit for a certain area of things. They've got issues, but they have. I don't think Solana has. And certainly not these 15,000 other shitcoins.
It's a very small number. I was actually thinking as you were speaking just now, like what the actual number is. I was going to say, you can count on one hand. Maybe it's more than 5, but it's a very small number. It's a very small number.